Hello everybody, welcome to episode number 2 of the Training Tuesday, a live show for those who want to improve in chess. Previously we started a discussion of the problem of improvement. So we came up with some concrete tips on improvement in general. And today we continue this very important topic. And today I have a very interesting task. So I want to introduce the basic algorithm of making decisions in chess. Because you know what? A game of chess in general is the process of making decisions. So every single move is a separate decision. So the better decisions you make, the more efficient decisions you make, the better. So the more chances you have to win the game. So actually, this algorithm is really basic. So you can apply it in a raw form, but it would be much better if you will drive it home first and then try to tweak it. So it provides some flexibility. So actually, you will have a chance to change this algorithm a bit and to come up with concrete procedures that fit you exactly. A few words about improvement again. So we can divide improvement onto three major parts. So the first is knowledge, the second is skills, and the third one is experience. So I can't do anything with the experience because experience is on you. However, what I definitely can is to provide you with some knowledge and to show you how to train your skills. So let's get to chess material. Few moments. And here we go. So the first position is very simple. However, don't be afraid that every position today will be very simple. Actually, we start with something easy, and then one example after another, we will increase the complexity. So in this position, black's turn to move. Of course, because if it is white's turn to move, white just makes rook h8 check, and it appears a checkmate. So what should we do when we face a certain position? So what is our first step before making a concrete decision, before making a concrete move? So we have to start with the evaluation process. What does it mean, actually? So many people think that evaluation is kind of understanding who stands better, but that's not true. Actually, what you need when you make an evaluation is to catch most important features of the position, because this will help you to direct the thinking. Because usually we have many alternative ways of moving, right? So it's actually not possible usually to calculate all of them. So we have to focus on several ones. And to make that properly, to make that correctly, to have a proper focus, we need to start with the evaluation to catch most important features of the position. And this will just direct our thinking. So the first stage of our algorithm is the evaluation. So let's try to evaluate this position. As for white pieces, we can see that king is exposed, right? So, by the way, the first tip every time starts with the position of the king, because king is the most important piece in chess. So, king here is exposed. As we can see, it lacks defense from pawns, from pieces, and so on. So there are different ways for black to attack the king. As for other pieces, well, they're quite active, especially this pawn on f6 and rook on f8. So rook creates a concrete threat of a checkmate. The pawn is only 2 squares before promotion, so it is extremely dangerous for black. And black should be quite quick here, because if black doesn't come with some concrete play, with some concrete attack probably, then pawn simply moves to f7 if nothing else happens. And then after rook goes away from f8, it goes to f8, and white will have a decisive material advantage. So this gives us an understanding that black should search for forcing continuations, because, for example, something simple to prevent rook h8, for instance, let's say king to h7, simply doesn't work, because white can probably continue with the f7 or something, and then the pawn will promote. So king h7 doesn't work here. Black has to search for forcing continuations. What does it mean? So forcing continuations are checks, usually captures, and active moves with the attack. So to understand what to attack, we have to pay attention to vulnerable squares and vulnerable pieces. So in white's position, the only vulnerable piece potentially is actually the king on f1. As for other pieces, well, they're protected, not so bad. As for pawns, well, potentially weakened pawns in white's position are h2, f2, maybe a2, but again, black has no time for thinking of attack of pawns, for example, so because white has a concrete threat of a checkmate and of course a threat of a promotion. So that's not the case. As for squares, so vulnerable squares in white's position are those that not protected well. For example, we can see g2 square. So it is protected by only the bishop, but at the same time it is controlled by the pawn. So pawn controls this square. It is a potentially vulnerable point in white's position, and maybe black can exploit this vulnerability. As for other squares, well, we can see that bishop f5 controls several. For example, d3 square is a square of potential check, right? So it might be dangerous to the king. So it is also a vulnerability that worth our attention. As for other squares, well, it's very hard to imagine what could be problematic to white. So everything else looks like fine. And now, after this evaluation, when we understood main features of the position, so we understood that black should be quick, black should search for forcing continuations, and also we catched several features, I mean several vulnerabilities, concrete problems in white's position maybe, and so on, we can get to the second stage of our algorithm. And the second stage is to create the candidates moves list. What does it mean? So here is another tip: never choose from the one. So actually you have to make an assumption that, for example, you have several moves here, several directions, several continuations, and then you have to calculate each of them and then to compare. So it gives you a chance when you create a candidates list, it gives you a chance not to miss something. And here comes another problem. So which moves to include in our candidates list and which not to include. So we have to focus on forcing continuations here. So that means checks, captures, and moves with concrete threats, moves, attacking moves probably. So the first is checks, right? So let's have a look which checks do we have. So checks are bishop to d3 and actually rook to g1. Only two checks. Well, of course, rook takes f2 is also a check, and we have to include it in our candidates list just to make sure that it doesn't give us anything concrete. So captures. As for captures, again, rook takes f2 is one of possible captures. Rook takes a2, but rook takes a2 is definitely not a move because rook h8 checkmate, so that doesn't work. So now we have to focus on checks. So rook f2 doesn't work, definitely. It's easy to understand. So if rook takes f2, then king takes f2, and black has no resources to proceed with further attack. As for rook to g1 check, it is also quite easy to understand that after king takes g1, black has no sufficient material for doing something. So it will just waste enough material and simply lose. And finally, bishop to d3. So bishop to d3 check is also a sacrifice because rook can take it. However, it changes something. So after rook takes, because actually it is the only move, because if king goes to e1, then just rook g1 checkmate. So as you can see, rook b2 controls the second rank, and now it is a typical checkmate. So rook has to take on d3. So something is changed in the position, and it is exactly the vulnerability of the first rank that appeared. Because now the rook doesn't control the first rank, so black has a chance to attack the king over the first rank. So here, just imagine everything happens in your mind only, because you have to calculate everything before making the move. Here, on this stage, when you understand that bishop d3 is probably your only chance, because only this move gives you a chance to do something and at least changes something in the position, makes it more vulnerable for white. So here you have to stop and again to create a candidates list. So as you can see, this procedure of creating a list of candidates continues on different stages of your calculation process. So that's how it works. And by the way, it is a typical trap, a psychological trap that many not very experienced players fall into. So they think that creating a candidates list is only the task for the initial position when they start their calculation. But that's not true. So you have to create candidates list every time when you understand it is the main direction. So when you calculate something, so when the depth is being increased on almost every stage, you have to create candidates list. And again, since you have no choice here and you have to continue with forcing continuations, you have to focus on checks. So here, after rook took on d3, black has again several checks. So a new one that became possible after rook d3 is rook to b1. Another one is rook to f2, and the third one is rook to g1. So rook f2 still gives nothing, so king takes and game is over. Rook to b1 gives white's king a chance to escape, so king goes to the second rank, and then after, for example, another check, king goes further, so it's not so hard to understand that black has nothing here. So white simply has extra material and continuing attack with the threat of promotion of the pawn. And finally, rook g1. So rook g1 was wrong on the first move, but it doesn't mean that it continues to be wrong for the next stage. So it is another typical trap that not very experienced players fall into. So it is mainly a psychological trap. So when they understood that move doesn't work, they continue thinking that it doesn't work even if something changes in the position, but it never works this way. So if something changed, then probably the move that was wrong might be correct in these new conditions. And if we check this rook g1, we can see that black easily wins. So if king takes on g1, we can see that now the first rank is empty, and after this check, white's king has no choice to escape, because these pawns f2 and h2 just betray their own monarch, and it's not possible to block rook b1. So after the only move rook d1, rook simply takes rook with the checkmate. So this example looks relatively easy. However, believe me, even some players rated around 2,200 just experienced some troubles finding this solution because it is not that obvious. And of course, here you can see there is this psychological trap. So if on the first move you think that rook g1 makes no sense, then after bishop d3, rook d3, well, you can simply miss this opportunity. And here is the question, right? What to do to prevent this bad situation when you miss in easy tactics or something like that? Well, the recipe is very simple. You have to create candidates list and never exclude continuations that were wrong one move before or several moves before. So within new conditions, these moves might be correct, like here after rook g1 on the second move. So the first move is wrong, the second move is correct. Okay, so let's get to the next example, which is another story completely. So we have actually a middle game position. For white, it is still an opening stage because the king is still in the center, and so on. So again, let us start with the evaluation of this position before creating candidates list and trying to calculate possible lines. So the most noticeable problem in white's position, for example, is exactly the king. So king is still in the center, bishop c4 controls diagonal a6 f1, preventing castling. Rook is already on d1, so it's not possible to castle long. So the king is here in the center, looks like almost forever, or at least for a long time, which means white has some problems potentially. We can also see that bishop on b2 is under attack, so we can see this queen attacking the bishop. At the same time, we should understand that if we have such a king, our opponent wants to attack it. So how to attack the king directly? For example, we can notice this b4 square, so this queen can get to b4 with the direct attack against our king, and it might be a problem because our king is limited. So this is about weaknesses in white's position and possible threats, possible problems. As for advantages, so we can see very active knight on f5. So it is very close to opponent's king. It exerts direct pressure on squares like and pawns g7, h6. Our bishop, by the way, bishop b2, also attacks this g7 pawn, so actually this pawn is under attack at the moment. This knight also controls e7 square, which is a square of possible check, so we have to understand that, and just to inject it in our brain to remember this possibility of a check. Also, what else? White has a bit more space probably, but this doesn't matter here, because again, position is not very clear, and this position actually might become very sharp very soon, because opponent already has a concrete threat of queen b4 at some point. So we have to be extremely careful. So as you can see, that is about main features of this position. So that is kind of evaluation process. By the way, a few words about this typical mistake about evaluating who's better, right? So understanding who stands better. Actually, it's not so easy to come up with this answer, and in the majority of cases, it might be not correct, because you never know before you started calculating concrete lines. So I just offer you to avoid this waste of time. So your focus is to understand main features, main vulnerabilities in your camp and main vulnerabilities in opponent's camp to direct your thinking. So since g7 is under attack and h6 is potentially vulnerable, and also e7 square is a square of potential check, and mainly due to the activity of this knight, we have to focus on the king side. And now it's time to create candidates list. By the way, I missed one very important detail as for vulnerable pieces. So we discussed vulnerable squares, vulnerable points in black's position, but we didn't discuss vulnerable pieces. Actually, bishop on c4 is vulnerable currently, so it is not protected, as well as the knight on c6. So such pieces are usually possible targets. So they are potentially weak, tactically mainly. So pieces that are not protected, you can attack them to combine several attacks and so on. So let's create a candidates list now. Checks. First, checks. So two possible checks here, knight e7 and knight h6. It's not so hard to understand that. It is probably not so easy to get something with the help of those checks. For example, knight takes h6, pawn takes h6, and what is next? Okay, something changed in the position. I mean, this diagonal became completely opened, so probably we can continue with the queen c3, creating a threat of a checkmate. But it's not clear if it is a good idea, because black has a defense. So here we can see that white's queen can, attacks the bishop and at the same time attacks g7 and h8 squares. So this is a sort of a double attack. So when you see such a situation in your mind, again, when you visualize such a position, you have to ask yourself a very important question. So what my opponent will do? So actually an obvious question, but you have to focus on possible defenses here, because at first glance it looks like a great idea to make this sequence. So to prevent a checkmate, black can block the diagonal, but that is not very good because of queen takes c4. And okay, maybe you don't win a material, but because your bishop is hanging, so I mean, if you take knight on c6, next move, black will take on b2. So positions still will be not clear. But even if you don't win that knight after king goes away or something like that, we can see that white achieved something. So pawns are deadly weak, you have pair of bishops, position tends to be opened, and well, this is potentially very, very dangerous for black. So this f6 is not a move, but what else? It looks like it is the only possibility. In fact, black has different options here. So knight d4, one of them, bishop d4, one of them, but what is more important, queen b4, which stops white's attack completely, because after queen b4, the queen is pinned. So inevitably it will be changed, it will be traded, and after that black will simply have a decisive material advantage, an extra minor piece. So such a move is not that obvious. However, you have to be sure that it doesn't exist if you want to come up with the knight takes h6 and queen to c3. So here we get to another tip. So be aware of opponent's resources. Never forget about opponent's resources. So every time ask yourself a question: what I might have missed, for example. And also another very important tip, create candidates list for your opponent as well. So just imagine you play with black in this particular case and try to focus on best resources for your opponent. It is, by the way, another typical psychological trap. So we usually try to find best continuations for us, but usually, or at least sometimes, fail to find the best continuations for our opponent. Well, I don't know exactly the reason for this psychological problem. However, it exists, believe me. So we usually overestimate our position and underestimate opponent's position. So to avoid this, you have to focus on opponent's resources. So it is a prophylactic thinking, more or less, but the main part is to ask yourself a question: what my opponent can do here? And this question just directs you to searching for best moves for your opponent, not just so-so, okay? So queen b4 stops. So after calculating this line in your mind, we can make some conclusions. So first of all, we have this interesting possibility of queen c3, just attacking the bishop, and g7 simultaneously. So if we have such a possibility, why on earth should we sacrifice the knight? So we can do this immediately, right? So as you can see, we increase our candidates list, just adding another active move with the attack, with the double attack. At the same time, we can see that there is a possibility of queen b4. So it is not only an attacking move, but also a good defensive resource to pin our queen. So having this in mind, we can conclude that, okay, maybe queen c3 is not that the best decision, because queen b4, and okay, our queen is being exchanged and black has no problems, our king still has problems, so probably we will be in trouble. So checks are already considered. Of course, knight e7 is also possible with the same idea. So after knight takes c7, then only queen c3. There is a difference because queen b4 is no longer possible, but I don't think black has much problems after, let's say, f6 move. So queen takes on c4, okay, king goes away and position is unclear. Bishop, as you can see, is hanging. King is still in the center, so black is ready for active operations, and well, the knight can get to a very good square on e5, so position is definitely unclear. So knight e7 doesn't work. Now for captures. Actually, we have several captures. One of them was at the same time a check. Knight h6, we already considered it. Queen f4 makes no sense because of queen takes b2, so the bishop is hanging. What else? We have a very natural move to capture the pawn on g7 with the bishop. So bishop is hanging, we attack g7 pawn twice, so why not to capture that pawn? Because at first it looks like a very important pawn, and again, at first this move bishop g7 looks simply devastating, because after that king g8 will be permanently weak, and the decisive attack looks like a question of a few moves. So we have to calculate bishop g7. So after bishop g7, black still has this queen b4 check. And we have to start exactly with this because it looks like the most dangerous for white. When we try to range opponent's moves, creating candidates list for him, we do the same. So we range in the correct order. So first checks, then captures, and only then active moves with some threats, and in the very end moves, just general moves, improving position, and so on. So queen b4 should be considered first. And after queen b4, appears that white has to put the queen on c3, because if bishop goes to c3, which looks just a great move with the tempo, attacking the queen, right, and creating a sort of knight takes h6 with further attack, and so on, appears that black has a decisive tactical trick, using the fact that, well, our king is still in the center, queen pins the bishop, which means that some squares that were controlled by that bishop now lack defense. So knight goes to e5. Brilliant move, actually leaving the queen hanging on b4, but the point is that white has no chance to take that queen, because if bishop takes, the knight takes f3 with the checkmate. So here the vulnerability of our king becomes really noticeable, right? Knight takes f3 and that's it. Game is over. And it is possible to predict, I mean, this knight e5, which probably not that obvious for not experienced players, to predict in your mind if you made the correct evaluation of the position. So when we discussed this position, when it just arose, actually we catched this fact that our king is limited. So this means we have to be aware of all resources that black can use to attack our king somehow. So all active moves towards our king, for example, like knight e5 here. And what is the problem with the knight e5? With that queen is attacked, right? So if we can't take on b4, if we can't take the knight, then we have to save our queen somehow. But as you can see, all squares on the third rank are controlled, which means if queen goes away from the third rank, then bishop is hanging. So queen takes c3, winning the game. So actually, this means after queen b4, the only chance for white is to play queen to c3, after which black, for example, has this rook to d8 move, and the further attack appears not that dangerous. For example, if knight takes on h6 with check, king easily goes to h7, and again, position is far from being clear because black has very active pieces. For example, e5 move, which looks very promising, leaves bishop g7 not protected, so king simply takes on g7 and it's all over. Black has decisive material advantage. Well, so despite some material disadvantage, position looks very promising for black, not for white. That's why bishop g7 doesn't work. So here, when we have this great amount of information, we can focus on something else. So since our bishop is hanging, we can't take on g7. Knight h6 looks not so clear. Knight e7 as well. So we have only one active move that we didn't estimate properly, that we didn't calculate at all at the moment. So we only made an assumption that probably it doesn't work because of queen b4, defensive idea. But come on, let's get back to that move because it looks promising, and at least it creates very concrete threat. So we have to calculate it properly. It is move queen to c3, attacking g7 and bishop on c4, which is vulnerable. And pay attention, knight on c6 is vulnerable as well. So this queen now controls this whole file, and if nothing else happens, for example, it will be even very hard to save all that pieces. But come on, black has this queen b4 that we already understood calculating other lines. So we have to check queen b4. Again, just imagine everything happens in your mind. So to understand what to do in this moment, just imagine you play this game with white pieces and this position is in your mind. So first you have to visualize it properly, to see this position as if it is already on the board. And then to ask yourself a question, to try to evaluate it again quickly. So what changed? What's wrong with black's pieces, for example? What's wrong with black's squares, and so on. So we can see if there is no queen on b4, well, we just capture on g7 with the checkmate. Queen on b4 in its turn is protected by only the knight c6, which is vulnerable as well. So actually everything is based on this knight on c6. So knight on c6 is a key piece here. And in such a situation, the most natural idea is to try to deflect the knight somehow. So to force it moving somewhere, and to leave the queen, for example, hanging. And it's possible to do because we have this knight e7 check, which was not that great on the first move, but now conditions are new, so now it works, if we calculate it properly, of course. So knight goes to e7 here. Natural idea to try to deflect the knight from c6. And white wins, because knight is invulnerable, it is check. So if, for example, knight takes on e7, then queen simply takes queen. That's it, game is over with an extra queen. If queen takes the knight, because it is also possible, there is no longer pin on diagonal a5 e1, so queen simply takes on g7 with a checkmate. This is also good for white. So the only possibility for black is just to go away with the king somewhere, let's say king h7, after which we can simply take the knight on c6, no more threats, and white simply wins with extra minor piece. That's it. So here, as you can see, position was probably a bit more complicated if compared to the previous example, to the first one. However, we tried to do almost the same. So first evaluation, then creating candidates list, then just a quick calculation of different moves that look at first glance not very promising, like knight h6, knight e7, then more detailed calculation of bishop g7 move, which looked very natural. And here we also came with the idea of being aware of opponent's resources, being very careful about opponent's resources. And also here we can see an interesting method. So calculating one line we found additional features. So additional feature was queen to c3 idea, and another additional feature was this queen b4, the move that helps black to save everything. So these moves we can miss, for example, when we analyze the initial position. So we can just not include them in our candidates list. But that's how it works. So you created a candidates list. For example, let's imagine you missed something. Then during calculations, you just see interesting ideas. And then the next stage is to ask yourself, can I apply those ideas in the initial position, for example, or in other lines, just to compare those lines. And this may increase your initial candidates list. And that is very important because this allows you not to miss very good and promising continuations. And also this allows you not to miss opponent's resources. So to pick some interesting ideas from different lines and to apply them in other lines. So in one line, it might be not good, but in the other line, it might be just the best idea. Okay, let's get to the next example. Another position of a different kind. So here it is a true middle game position, in which we can see that white is missing an exchange. By the way, another important point that I didn't mention is you have to start your evaluation process with the understanding the material balance, but I guess it's really obvious. So here we can see that white is missing an exchange. This usually means that white has to be really aggressive, because if nothing happens, well, black just activates all the pieces and having extra material wins the game. Because more extra material means black has more resources. The more resources he has, the more chances to perform the attack, for example, and so on. It's clear again. So let's focus on concrete features of this position. We can see that white actually has no weaknesses. The only possible problem may be with the g2 pawn, because it is placed on the open file and at the same time on the open diagonal. So for example, when bishop goes to b7, it might be a serious problem, but it is the only one. As for other squares and for example pieces, well, everything looks fine. Of course, concrete problem is our queen is hanging, but maybe it is not a problem. Other pieces are quite active. For example, rook on d1 occupies open d file. Bishop b3 and knight d4 exert pressure on f5 and e6. Vulnerable pawns in black's camp. What else? What weaknesses has our opponent? Our opponent definitely has a problem with the king. So we can see that king is vulnerable. So it is not protected by pawns, because there is no pawn on the g file. It is not protected with pieces, not enough, I mean, because we can see that it is a current problem with the back rank. So if our rook appears on the back rank, well, it might be a checkmate. So it is a very important idea, very important moment to understand here in this position. What else? Well, our opponent, as we can see, lacks some development. So rook is still in the initial position on a8, bishop is still not developed, which means that currently we probably even have the advantage in the quantity of resources involved in the game. In such a situation, well, this missing exchange might be not that important at all. Now it's time to get to creating candidates list. Again, first, checks. We have only two normal checks here. They are queen f8 and queen e8. Others just don't work. So after both of them, black is not in danger. For example, after queen f8 or queen e8 doesn't really matter. Rook simply goes to g8 and everything is fine. So queen is forced to move. After which probably black will have the time for completing a development with the help of bishop b7, or creating some threats to g2 with the help of, for example, queen to e4, or even queen to g7. So both moves are quite interesting to consider. So it's definitely not good. What else? Captures. So we can capture probably on e6 and f5. I can't see any other object of attack and any other possibility to capture. But the problem with that, our queen is hanging, right? So it's not so easy to capture at first glance. However, the basic problem for black here is the vulnerability of the back rank. So we have to consider all the moves that lead to creating a threat of rook d8 check, a potential checkmate. And one of those moves is to capture with the knight one of the pawns, because it unleashes the rook and creates this concrete threat. So here we can start with, for example, knight e6 move or knight f5. So after calculating knight e6, well, the most natural idea for black is, of course, to take the queen. We have to check that. And after rook takes the queen, we can see that knight controls g7 square, at the same time controlling f8 square, but g7 is just enough to perform the decisive checkmating attack. Rook goes to d8, after rook f8, rook simply takes f8 with a checkmate. So as you can see, our queen is invulnerable after knight takes e6. But the problem with the knight takes e6 is that bishop takes on e6. And the back rank is protected. This exchange leads to further simplification. White is forced to take with the queen, after which I guess black is happy just to exchange queens. And well, white has some compensation for missing material, but I believe it is not what white wants to achieve. And again, we use the same method. So during quick calculation of one candidate move, knight e6, we understood that, well, after capturing the pawn and controlling g7 square simultaneously, our queen is not vulnerable. That's very important. So now we can focus on another move. It is knight takes f5, because it has the same basic idea behind. It is rook to d8 with the checkmate. At the same time, it doesn't allow black's bishop to capture the knight, and this means it is a tempo move. It wastes no time and limits opponent's possibilities. And it definitely works fine if black takes the queen, so actually the same, rook d8 and takes an f8 with the checkmate. It is great if, for example, black captures on f5, either with a queen or pawn, doesn't really matter. In that case, rook goes to d8 and checkmate. So what else? How to protect the back rank? It is probably possible with the help of development of the bishop somewhere, but then it's not so easy for black to survive after a simple capture on g7. So white exchanges some pieces, winning the exchange back, but what is more importantly, for example, after king takes g7, well, rook goes to d7 check and rook takes on b7. But even if there is no rook d7 in the end, well, we can see that white has two extra pawns, which is more than enough to win the game. So this line also doesn't work. So after knight f5 looks like white simply wins, right? Is it enough to make a decision? No. Actually, when you see this concrete win in a real game and you can't see defense for your opponent, at first glance at least, you have to ask yourself these important questions. What I might have missed, for example. It may be another question, but the idea is the following: to focus on finding best resources for your opponent. And one of those moves, when you try to analyze this position in your mind in details, is queen e1. So actually, the feature of the position that our queen is hanging, which means that black potentially can sacrifice its own queen, right? And then to capture that one. So queen goes to e1. That is the point. That is a great defensive resource that you have to predict before making move knight f5 in a real game. So in this particular case, it doesn't work. It doesn't help. But in any other position, it might change the situation completely and just destroy, for example, your idea, your attack, and so on. So queen e1 check, trying to deflect our rook. But what is great here is that our rook is protected. So it's not a big problem for us. In fact, king simply goes to h2. Because if we take the queen, I think it's obvious. Rook takes f7, and again, the most dangerous things are over, and black has chances to win with the extra material. Probably white will have chances to survive here, probably not, but doesn't matter. So our task is to attack, and after queen e1, rook f7, we have no attack. So after queen e1, king h2 should be calculated. And now again, you have to ask yourself a question: what my opponent will do here, and try to find best moves, best possibilities. Because you have to be sure that your idea works. You have to be sure that your calculation is accurate. After king h2, black has several checks, and you have to consider those checks. Still, rook f7 doesn't work because of rook d8 checkmate. Queen takes d1, for example, makes no sense because rook on g7 is hanging, so queen takes g7 checkmate. Doesn't work as well. So black has only two options to keep fighting. It is queen to e5 check, and another one, and also possible check, is rook to g2, which looks not enough, which looks strange, but you have to consider it to be sure, because you never know. Position is sharp, and probably rook g2 changes something in the position and might be a dangerous resource. So you have to be sure that it makes no harm before making knight f5 move. So let's see. If queen goes to e5, then probably the best choice for white is to protect the king with the help of g3. So no more checks, and black has this serious problem. So rook on g7 is hanging. There is a threat of a checkmate on d8. So it's time to do something. But well, it's very hard to find anything good. So let's say, for example, rook to g8, another resource, by the way, that we didn't discuss during this main line analysis. So let's have a look on rook g8 for a few seconds to understand what happens here. Well, white has a chance to continue the attack, simply attacking the rook on g8 with the knight again, because this rook is limited and there are no chances to go away from the back rank. It's possible to do with the knight h6. I think it will be enough. The same is knight e7 probably. Just attacking the rook. If bishop goes to b7, we capture the rook first, then capture the bishop and win. Knight h6 is probably a bit better, but it's just a question of taste how to win here. So this doesn't work. Now to the main line, rook takes g2, because only this move changes something in the position, so it breaks the balance and makes our king vulnerable. Okay, king has to take on g2, we have no choice here. Again, black has two checks here, so queen e4 and bishop b7. Bishop b7 is another sacrifice, but anyway, we have to consider that move. So queen to e4, let's start with this move that sacrifices nothing. So here, well, almost everything wins. For example, simple king g1 move, just making our king safe. And now we have a threat of queen g7, queen f8, rook to d8, and black simply can't meet all of them in one move. So white wins. That's clear. So let's get back to bishop b7 move, because this move helps to complete the development and to connect the rook to the attack of our vulnerable king. So queen takes on b7, probably the most natural reply that should be calculated. Rook goes to g8, check. And now simply knight goes to g3. So knight goes back, protecting the king. G file is closed. Diagonal a8, h1 is under control. Black has no problems, but has two extra minor pieces. So game is over. That's it. So that what it should look like. I mean, the concrete calculation process, concrete decision-making process. So you start with the evaluation, concrete features of the position, you direct your thinking, you find the idea of knight e6 controlling g7, you understand that it doesn't work in the view of bishop e6, you get to knight takes f5 then, you get to the point that, okay, if black makes nothing strange, for example, nothing non-standard, well, he just loses in all the lines, then you ask yourself a question, what I might have missed, and you find this resource of queen e1 check, and then accurately continue just calculating this line on every move, being aware of opponent's different forcing resources like rook g2, bishop b7, and so on. So general advice for sharp positions. In sharp positions, everything is possible. Okay, so again, it's obvious, but be careful with sharp positions. So in sharp positions, your calculations should be also quite sharp. So you have to consider different sacrifices, different moves occupying not protected squares like bishop b7 here, different blows like rook g2, and so on. So you have to be aware and you have to be very careful before making final decision of making move knight takes f5. Okay, so let's get further. Another position is really non-standard. So in this position, black's turn to move, and we can see that black is missing a queen. However, at the same time, black has very interesting compensation. So 3 minor pieces, including pair of bishops. So that is potentially dangerous for white's king. So again, evaluation first. Material balance we already discussed. Now for squares and pieces. So we can see that black's bishops are directed to the queen side, where white's king is situated. Knight on d2 is very active, just controlling square b1, limiting the king, and also controlling b3 square, a square of potential check and attack against the king. Bishop controls a2, so actually at the moment the king is completely limited. So that is a sign that different checkmating patterns are possible here. As for the rook, it is also very active here, controlling important squares and controlling the third rank, which is also very important, because to come up with the attack, black has probably to destroy white's king shelter, because at the moment it is more or less protected with pawns. As for white's position, well, white has potentially the idea of pushing his pawns on the queen side, but in the nearest future it is just impossible, because come on, if pawns just start moving, well, the king will become more and more vulnerable. So that's a problem for white. So actually white has no active plan here, because black has no weaknesses. The king is comparatively safe here on h7, so it is surrounded by pieces and so on. So we can focus on our advantages here with black. So as we discussed, the main feature that the king is strongly limited, so it is in the corner, and probably we have to come up with the attack against the king using the power of bishops and of course all other pieces involved. We can actually attack the king with 4 pieces, which is quite a dangerous situation, because white can protect the king only with pawns and probably with the rook, probably with the queen, so it might be not enough. So remember, actually, for those, it is an important information for those who don't know that, usually perfectly coordinated three minor pieces are better than the queen. So queen can be better than three minor pieces only in case those pieces are not coordinated, so can't create concrete threats, and also if there are so many different pawn weaknesses, or for example one general weakness like a weakness of the king. In that case, probably queen might be better, or at least not worse, but in the vast majority of cases, three minor pieces that are coordinated are better than the queen. But still, black has to come up with the concrete play here, otherwise it's not possible to prove that those pieces are better than the queen. So again, creating candidates lists. Since we have a concrete target, it is the king and the queen side, we have to consider different attacking continuations. Of course, first we have to include checks in our candidates list. And in this position, we have only two checks. They are rook to f1 and knight to b3. Knight to b3 looks really natural. So let's just make sure that rook f1 gives nothing. Definitely it gives nothing because rook simply takes on f1 and nothing changes actually. So knight takes, queen takes, and white wins. So this is not a move. So let's start with the knight b3. As you can see, despite I advised that, come on, you have to create candidates list, but every time I just start showing you different lines, and only then to add different candidates to our list. Actually, over the board, within concrete playing conditions, your brain may work this way. So you don't actually create a list of candidates moves, right? You create a list of candidates possibilities. So they may include several moves. And here, for example, there is a good tip that works for me, for instance. I usually start with quick scanning of the position. So when I understand the general direction of the thinking process, I start quickly calculating different lines, especially when they are forced. This gives me an understanding of the complexity of the position. It gives me an understanding of the complexity of each line, and just gives me additional information about next stages of my calculation process. So for example, if I understand that this line is promising but not very clear, this line gives me nothing, okay? So this line, for instance, is too complicated and I can't understand anything about it. I can make just a normal range of calculation then. So I can focus, for example, on the most clear line, at least how it looks during this quick scanning. I can focus the opposite on the most complex line, just to understand that I have nothing there, or for example I have something there, and so on, and only then to check some easy lines that I understand takes not so much time to calculate. So it gives me additional information, and this can also work for you. So quick scanning of the position, so quick calculation of several lines, just to understand which of them is the most promising, which of them is the most complicated, and then to make the correct range of these candidates' possibilities. But of course, it depends on your current level. It depends of your calculation skills. So for the first time, probably it's better to stick to the habit of creating a list of candidates' moves. So why it is so important? Because many players just starting calculating something forget about other possibilities and make a wrong evaluation in the end, and make hence a wrong decision, or at least not the best decision or not efficient decision. So this habit of creating candidates list first gives you a chance not to forget, at least to check those moves, because they are just injected in your brain, injected in your memory. So you just, if you don't find anything concrete in other lines, you just come back to those lines, to those possibilities. So here, knight b3 is one of those possibilities, because it is check, and we have to start with checks, and it is a very natural move. We can see easily that after king a2, for example, knight goes to c5, attacking the king and queen simultaneously. So this looks like a promising move. However, after king b1, it's not so easy to find something concrete, because continuing the attack against the king after bishop e4 leads to nowhere after king goes to a2. So as you can see, our light squared bishop can't combine the features of attacking piece on both diagonals. So this bishop can come back to d5 probably, but this gives black nothing, because king again goes to b1, for instance. So this move is interesting, promising, tempting, but not enough to achieve anything concrete. Now to captures. So we have a possibility to capture the pawn on c3 with the rook and with the bishop. So both are sacrifices, so it's better to start probably with capturing with a minor piece, because it leaves us with more material after all. So let's see, bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, rook takes c3. Okay, position changed, the king became more vulnerable. However, it doesn't seem like black has a decisive attack here, so black just sacrificed material for nothing. And now to rook c3. So rook c3 appears a very dangerous move, very interesting candidate possibility, since if white takes on c3, bishop takes on c3, and it is already a checkmate. So as we understood during the evaluation process, the king is vulnerable and strongly limited. So as I said before, there are so many different checkmating patterns potentially possible. So that is one of them. So bishop takes on c3, and three minor pieces just demolish the king. So what to do instead? Actually, what black wants to do next. After rook took on c3, as you can see, this rook became more dangerous to the king, because now it controls the third rank even better. So, for example, a3 is a potentially weakened pawn, weakened square in white's position, because what actually changed after rook c3 is the bishop f6 activity. So bishop became a monster here. So now it exerts direct pressure on b2, and black has a chance to get to that square easily by playing, for example, rook b3 next move. So that is a concrete threat. So what to do after rook takes c3? If queen, for example, gives up the a file somehow, for example, I don't know, occupying, let's say, something like b6 square, well, a3 is hanging because of this pin along the diagonal h8, a1. So rook can take on a3. So, well, white has to do something here, something concrete to prevent this great tandem of the rook c3, which will be on b3 or c2, it depends, and the bishop f6, creating decisive threats to b2. And the only way to do that is to take on f6. Maybe a surprising move, maybe not, but it could work. So again, being aware of opponent's resources, being careful about that during calculation makes great sense. So queen takes f6, white just sacrifices the queen back, but the idea here is that if black easily takes on f6, white takes on c3, and despite black has two minor pieces against the rook, white has actually very dangerous passed pawns. So here it is a typical pattern, right? When, for example, you have two minor pieces against the rook, you have also some passed pawns, but it is the late endgame stage. and usually having such pawns like a3, c3 changes the evaluation of this balance. So in such a situation, the rook, of course, is not worse than a pair of minor pieces. Moreover, it is not so easy to come up with a concrete plan with black. So if black starts, for example, pushing f pawn, then rook goes to d1, attacking the knight, the bishop, and so on. And actually, position is not clear. So probably it is equal if both sides play correctly, but when it arises in your mind during calculation, you should estimate it correctly. And the evaluation says position is completely unclear, which means that it is a wrong direction for you, because you had so promising attacking position, and now everything is not clear. So if you have such a result as a final position of your calculation, well, you have to avoid this line 100%. So takes on f6 doesn't work. What else? So when you understand that it is a critical moment, when you understand it is a critical position, you have to visualize it correctly, and again to stick to the method. So the method means creating candidates list, focusing on most attempting continuations, most forcing continuations, again, captures and checks. So checks. As for checks, black has several checks. They are rook takes a3, rook goes to c1, and knight goes to b3. So the most natural one is, of course, knight to b3, because it forces the king somewhere, and probably black can continue with some further attack against the king. Rook takes a3 is really easy to estimate. So after rook a3, pawn takes, well, king achieves this additional b2 square, and the best outcome is, again, this endgame. Well, in this case, white has no additional c3 pawn, but maybe it is even better, because now the king has free way to the center to be activated, and so on. And this, still there is a problem, because white has this outside passed pawn, so the rook is not worse than a pair of minor pieces here. So rook takes a3 doesn't change anything. Rook to c1 looks a bit stupid at the moment in your mind. So rook takes c1, and what's next? Knight to b3 probably, and so on. So you have to start probably with the knight b3 calculation. So okay, knight goes to b3. Again, two options here, king a2 and king to b1. So the first is probably king to b1, the most natural, just avoiding this possibility of discovered check. What to do here? So bishop to e4, well, probably a possible move, but then king goes to a2. And again, nothing concrete. So as you can see, knight c1 is possible, but then simply rook takes c1. Well, nothing changed. Bishop d5 back, okay. It's possible even to take the rook. So black has no time for something like that here. So after king b1, it's not so easy to continue, but again, position is very sharp, so you have to predict different non-standard strange moves and so on. And the best way to do that is to consider all possible checks. So here knight d2 changes nothing, of course, because king goes to a1 and position repeats. So the only additional move here is rook to c1, which you should consider, because in this case it might work in. So rook goes to c1 check. And what happens here? So if rook takes on c1, one more check, bishop to e4, changes everything completely. Because now, if king goes to a2, then knight takes c1. And after king goes away, pawn simply takes on f6. And come on, black has two extra minor pieces. So this definitely doesn't work. If rook goes to c2, come on, okay? Again, we were not forced to take on c2 first, allowing white's king to attack our knight on b3. We can take on f6. The rook is pinned. We will take it next move, or maybe in several moves, or even leave this move being pinned and start just pushing our pawns to queen, because it's very hard to unpin the rook. So black has a winning position again. So in this line, as you can see, rook c1 works. A very interesting idea and very surprising one maybe, but actually it is a typical layout for this sort of positions. However, it can be found even without knowing that layout. So if you just follow the method, follow the algorithm, you will consider this check. No way. So here it doesn't work. But what about king to a2? So we understood that two candidates are possible. So king to b1 and king to a2. So this counterintuitive move, king to a2, allowing the discovered check, appears just enough. Because, for example, after knight goes to d4, check, or anywhere, king goes back probably on a1 or b1. So it's not so easy to continue the attack here. So again, the best outcome for black is to take the queen, but then after pawn takes rook, we have the same sort of endgame, which is not clear. So king a2 here destroys our system. However, we found a very interesting idea of this rook to c1, and then after rook takes, bishop goes to e4. So in such a situation, we just get back in our mind to this position, so visualize this position, and continue with our list. So we created a list consisting of rook takes a3, knight takes b3, and rook to c1 check, right? So let's check if rook c1 works here, because at first glance it looked like a stupid idea, but after we calculated that line, it no longer looks like a stupid idea. It looks like a very promising idea. And in fact, rook to c1 in this situation works just perfectly. So after rook c1, rook takes c1 is forced. Then knight goes to b3, and the difference is that now if king goes to a2, which was correct in the previous line when we calculated knight b3 first, here rook on c1, not on g1, so we can capture it with check. After which king goes away, we capture the queen, having the extra minor piece. And okay, this position should be easily winning for black, because black has the extra minor piece, extra bishop, controlling squares of promotion for white's pawns and stopping them if necessary. And of course, black has passed pawn that goes to queen quickly. And after knight b3, for example, if king goes to b1, this transposes to the position that we should have already calculated. So bishop goes to e4, check, forcing rook c2 or king a2. In both cases, black simply wins with extra material. And that is how it works. So this calculation, including all these lines, will be enough to make a decision in this particular case. You might ask me why it is not enough just to capture on c3 first and then to see what happens. I mean that, okay, at least you have this endgame with two minor pieces and so on, so you have some promising attacking possibilities. Maybe it's better just to make a move and then to see, because when position arises on the board, of course, no questions, you can see more. It is usually quite hard to visualize it, especially when the depth is great. However, no. So if you see nothing concrete in this continuation after rook c3, and when you understand that at best everything that you achieve finally is that endgame, well, you have to avoid taking on c3 with the rook. Why? Because, well, at this moment you have much more promising position, because here you have a better balance of pieces, some perspectives, some sort of attacking threats, and so on, and there you will have nothing. But if you see that idea, well, of course, you're welcome to make rook c3 move, because after rook c3, actually, queen f6 is the best reaction. Everything else just fails, because black has really decisive threats after rook c2 or rook b3. And by the way, rook c2 won't be a mistake in the view of queen d3, because black has very good bishop e4 move. And pay attention, rook is on c2, knight on d2 protects bishop on e4. Bishop on e4 protects the rook on c2, and at the same time knight d2 is protected by the rook from d2. So a great coordination of pieces. And at the same time, rook also controls c8, a possible square of check. So everything is fine here for black. But only if you understand what happens after queen f6, only if you find this not very easy, not very obvious, however, a brilliant idea of rook c1, this sacrifice prior to putting the knight on b3. So to make such a decision, well, you actually need additional knowledge. So the knowledge of typical attacking patterns, some endgame patterns as well, and so on. However, well, even if you simply follow the method, follow the algorithm, you will have a chance to find all those moves. So that is a question of discipline. If you create a habit of thinking this way, then one game after another, one training after another, it will be easier, and easier. So for the first time, of course, it will grab serious resources in complex positions, for example, because you have to calculate a lot. But you have to do that because actually everything, everything that is connected with the success in chess, actually connected with the proper calculation. Who calculates better usually wins. Of course, if we have all other things equal. So it's worth doing it, believe me. Okay, let's get to another example, and probably this one. Yeah, this looks very interesting. So again, we have a late middle game position. We still have heavy pieces on the board, especially queens. In this position, black's turn to move, and black has to make a decision. Again, evaluation first. So black has very active pieces. Queen d4 and knight e4. Rook on a8 is not that active at the moment, but it can become very dangerous to white in 1 or 2 moves. So it is also potentially very active. We can see this king in the corner, which is actually a sign of a possible smothered mate, right? So we have the queen on this diagonal, we have the knight very close to the king. So first, what we have to check here is a possibility to checkmate white with the help of smothered mate. But first, we have to finish the evaluation process to be aware of all important features of the position. We can see that white has a very active bishop on this diagonal a2, g8. So it exerts pressure on f7, which also means that it exerts pressure on our king, right? So, for example, if f file is being opened, let's say with the help of f5 takes g6, it becomes really dangerous. So black should be careful with that to understand that it is a potential threat, and it might appear just next move. What else? Actually, white also has a problem with the back rank because the king is in the corner. There is no place on the second rank, so that is also potential vulnerability, potential weakness, and potential object of our desires. So looks like everything is fine with our evaluation, so we understood main features. Now it's time to create candidates list. So checks first. We have only 2 normal checks here. Well, actually only 1 normal check, but if we compare a knight g3 check with the queen g1 check, actually knight g3 looks normal. So knight g3 gives nothing. Queen takes or pawn takes doesn't matter, and nothing happens. And knight f2 is a normal check. So we have to calculate this knight f2. At the same time, we can probably include some active moves to our candidates list, but it's not so easy to find a active move instead of this check on f2, because as I said before, there is a threat of taking on g6, a concrete threat. So probably only rook e8 can be a move here in addition to knight f2, because after rook e8 there is a threat of a discovery check with capturing the rook on e1. So that is also a candidate move, of course. So let's start with check. So knight goes to f2, check, forcing king to g1, and the first thing that we have to check here if this moderate mate pattern works. No, it doesn't work, because if knight goes to h3 check, for example, it's possible just to get back to the corner if necessary, and since queen controls f2 square, this queen g1 leads to nothing. Rook takes g1 and knight f2 is not possible, so this doesn't work. However, we can already see that, well, black has another possible jump with the knight here. It is knight to d3 with check and attacking the rook at the same time, rook on e1. So why not to check this? Of course, it's the most tempting continuation. It's another check, and it leads to creating concrete threats. And at first glance, looks that, well, black should win, because it's check. The only possibility at first glance is rook to e3, protecting the king and the rook at the same time, after which, well, probably black can simply continue with, let's say, rook to e8. f5 takes g6 will be too slow, because in this case queen simply takes on e3 with check, and after this exchange, well, white has no sufficient counterplay, so black wins. What else? For example, bishop takes f7 should be also calculated here, so prior to taking on g6, just to make our king really exposed. But after king takes f7, let's say f5 takes g6, because white has nothing better. Well, it's possible to do almost everything. One of possible variations is just to get back to the corner of the board after. Okay, this is not possible because of yeah, queen f7 and then g7, deflecting our queen and then checkmating. So this is not possible, so we should be careful. After this check, we have to take on g6 exactly. So king takes g6. Okay, white probably has some more checks here, maybe queen g3, then queen to h3 if necessary. But in this particular case, our king can go to the corner of the board and everything should be fine. So check here, probably one more check. Okay, king goes to g8, and when the next check comes, then king goes to h8. No more checks, and the rook on e3 is still hanging. So it looks like black wins. But after knight d3, again, you have to be careful and you have to ask yourself a question: what might I have missed? And in this case, you have to, well, at least you have a good chance. Yeah, you have a good chance to find queen to e3 defense. And it is definitely the best move for white, because in this case, well, queen is hanging. So it's not possible to take the rook. If queen takes, then rook takes, and everything is more or less fine. So in this situation, I think that white has better chances, because the knight is attacked, it should go away, after which rook will get to the 7th rank, for example, attack on b7, attack on f7, or something like that. So white definitely has better chances with the bishop, with a very active bishop and very active rook. So this doesn't work, which might be looking like a refutation of our knight f2, knight d3 idea. So in this case, if you don't see anything concrete, it's probably better to get back a bit and to consider another active move that was included in your candidates list. It is rook to e8. Creating a concrete threat of knight f2 now, because in this case, if king goes away, then come on, rook takes e1 with the checkmate. So it is a serious threat, which at first glance gives black a chance to win the game easily, because it's not so easy to find a defense. But during the evaluation process, we understood that our king is potentially very vulnerable. This bishop is quite great. Queen is also exerts this pressure on f7. So we have to consider the move like f5 takes g6, creating concrete threat. to capture on f7. And after knight f2 check, of course, if king g1, the rook e1 wins. But white has a brilliant resource here. Queen simply takes on f2, just sacrificing the queen. Queen is hanging, rook is hanging, f7 is hanging, and that's the problem. So queen takes f2 looks like the only normal move here. And now, instead of taking the rook on e8, which leads to king to g7, and black should win because there is a threat of queen f1 checkmate, intermediate threat, white first takes on f7 with the fork, attacking the king and attacking the rook. And the problem with that, if king goes away somewhere, then takes with the queen, not with the rook, because this leaves back rank not protected and black wins. So takes with the queen and protecting the rook on e1 at the same time. And by the way, queen f7 doesn't work here, doesn't help. Because, well, if bishop takes f7, king f7, rook e8, king e8, probably black has some chances, but maybe even there black is lost. But rook e8 is much better here, using the pin. And, well, next move, white takes the queen and wins the game easily. So again, rook e8 looks like simply doesn't work. It loses the game. You understood that after knight f2, king g1, knight e3, queen e3 is a defense. Rook e8 doesn't work, knight g3 makes no sense. So what to do? Again, the same question. What might I have missed? And this probably directs you to the most promising continuation. So what is the most promising continuation here among those you already calculated? Definitely knight f2 and knight d3, because it creates this pressure on white's position and a lot of pieces are hanging, so it is a sharp position and there is a big chance that you miss something, in fact. So let's get back to that line. Knight goes to f2, king goes to g1, knight goes to d3 check, the only defense is queen to e3, and you have to visualize this position correctly in your mind and to focus on this position. And again, to try to create candidates list, try to make this quick evaluation and so on. So if queen takes e3, rook e3, we already discussed and already understood that it leads to nowhere. So what else? What other active continuations black has, since there are no more checks except for queen takes e3? So, well, captures, right? So knight takes c1 makes no sense. Queen takes queen and that's it. Game is over. So what else? Here it's time to actualize your understanding of vulnerable points in white's position. So one of the main problems in the initial position was the vulnerable back rank, right? So here situation didn't change because knight controls f2 and still no square for a king on the second rank. So the back rank is still vulnerable. How to get to the back rank with the tempo? Because queen is hanging, so black has to be quite aggressive here. At the same time, we can see that queen on e3 is pinned, so it can't move anywhere he wants. And here you can recognize this typical tactical pattern, which starts after rook e8. You have a chance to recognize it, of course, if you apply this method, apply this algorithm. So rook e8 looks just perfect because queen is attacked. It's not possible to take the rook because queen is pinned. Bishop f7 here makes no sense since king simply takes f7 and queen is still pinned. So it doesn't change the situation. And if queen takes on d4, rook takes on e1 with a checkmate. So it looks like it is over, right? So the calculation got to the very promising result, and it's time to make a move knight f2 in the initial position, but it's not true. So in such a sharp position, again, you have to ask yourself a question about opponent's resources. You have to be aware of opponent's resources, and it appears that white has the one. It is bishop to e6, one of a sudden, just closing the e-file and protecting everything. So here you have to calculate the most natural continuation. It is queen takes queen first, rook takes, and you can see bishop is pinned, so knight at first glance has a chance to go away somewhere, and well, black should win a minor piece. But it appears it's not so easy to do. For example, if knight goes to, let's say, b2, then rook goes to e2, for example, and attacks the knight again. If knight goes away somewhere, for example, on a4 or d1, it's possible to get back with the bishop on c4, protecting the rook. Everything will be fine. If knight goes back to d3, well, rook comes back, still attacking the knight. Well, capture. What happens if we capture the bishop? Rook takes the knight, for example, pawn takes pawn, and pawn takes pawn again. Come on, material is even, it is a rook endgame, and looks like white's chances are at least not worse. So what to do here? Maybe knight to f4, maybe, but still. Rook goes to e4, attacking the knight. And if knight takes e6, the same pattern, so pawn takes, for example, pawn takes, and then pawn takes. Again, not clear who fights for what. So after rook e4, maybe g5, just protecting the knight, and rook is still vulnerable. Well, in this case, bishop d5 is possible, protecting everything again. So white has great resources here. So queen e3 doesn't work. Queen e3 leads to nothing. So what actually to do here? Again, the only possibility to make a decision here is to focus on that position in your mind and to try to come up with some sort of quick evaluation. So what changed after bishop e6? So after bishop e6, we can see that bishop is vulnerable. So bishop is hanging actually. If something happens, for example, that helps us to protect the knight somehow, bishop will be hanging as well as the rook on e1, so it is still hanging. So two hanging pieces. So a typical pattern for double attacks, or at least a situation in which your opponent has no chance to save all pieces in one move. And this gives you a chance to find this rook d8 move. Very calm one, simply protecting the queen, and appears that in this particular position, white has no solution because, well, rook is hanging, bishop is hanging, queen is still pinned, so bishop f7 gives nothing. What to do? To take on d4? Okay, no problems. Rook takes, and now it is not possible to exploit the same motive to attack the knight on d3 because it is already protected. So when the rook goes away, black simply takes the bishop and wins the game. So again, there might be a question. Why should you do all this work, all this hard work in your mind before playing knight to f2 and so on? I mean, at the moment when you found already this great rook e8 idea, looks like it is the time just to play knight f2. But in fact, why it is so important to be aware of opponent's resources, just like bishop e6 or something else, is that in this particular case, after bishop e6, nothing really dangerous happens to black. So if black faces this missed resource already having this position over the board, on the board, okay, nothing dangerous happens. But in any other position, such a missed resource may change everything and to turn everything inside out. That's why it is so important. You have to train. So you have to visualize positions. You have to ask yourself correct questions about missed resources from your side, from your opponent's side. In sharp positions, you have to make double, triple checks and so on every time, at least for the first time when you start working on your calculation, on improvement on this way, because many mistakes are made exactly in this field. So when you miss some resources from your opponent's side mainly, there are some typical traps that we discussed already on this show a bit earlier. So that is in general the algorithm. that I wanted to introduce of making decisions in chess. So basic algorithm. First stage, evaluation. Second stage, accurate calculation and comparing different alternatives. And the next stage, the final stage, again, some sort of evaluation, because you have to evaluate every line that you calculated and then to choose between them, and of course to choose the best one. So it is a general layout for making decisions in chess. So as you can see, we discussed today mainly technical positions, sharp positions. So for sharp positions, you can apply this basic algorithm in this row form. But for different types of positions, it may be not so good. So we will discuss the difference between different types of positions next shows, and I will tell you how to tweak the algorithm, how to improve that, and to apply to different types of positions and so on. But what is more important is that you can apply this algorithm right now. You can tweak it because it is flexible, as you can see, because, for example, instead of creating candidates moves list, you can create candidates possibilities list, and so on. So the main goal for you is to come up with more and more accurate calculation process to see how it works. How this algorithm works to you. If it works not fine, well, you have to understand why and maybe to change this a bit. But believe me, for the first time, it will be a good solution. As for smart infographics, so I understand that everything that I told you today was probably not so easy to drive home. So for better understanding and for better learning of all those things, I will provide an extra video material with infographics. If you don't want to miss it, just to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you will see that video in a few days, I guess. So thank you very much for being with me. Next Tuesday we will continue with this improvement process, tips and tricks. I will show you some interesting resources for working on your calculation and decision-making process. And tomorrow I will play Banter Blitz, so everybody is welcome to follow and to challenge me. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.